Hello and welcome to Extra Time. You join us for the fourth and final part of our series with our friends at Muckle, and we're saving the best till last, hey? Should we put it that way? Jessie, Ryan, great to have you with us to really examine and look into financial controls. But before we come on to all the questions, for those who haven't met you before, Ryan, but also for you to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your role and what you do here at Muckle.
Shall I go first? So my name's Jessie and I'm a solicitor in the sports team at Muckle. I've been working at Muckle for just over 2 years now.
Yep, and I'm Ryan, I'm a paralegal in the sports team here. Been here about 4 years and just get involved in basically everything that we do for clubs.
Brilliant. Well, it's great to have you both on. And look, I made a bit of a joke about it there, saving the best till last. But we have thought about this series deliberately for volunteers so that they can build a real understanding of how to get their football governance right. And financial controls actually is so important. We know how essential it is really to running a sustainable football club. So from a sort of legal perspective, what does financial confidence look like?
From our perspective, financial confidence and financial controls in general, it includes a few different things. So that's things like budget setting. It's just about having a general oversight of what money's coming in and out of the club. And what we really want clubs to be doing is thinking about what facilities they have and how they can improve those to be generating an income. And they want to be thinking about generating income at the moment, yes, but also in the future as well. So then they can be ensuring that the club has success and that success is sustainable as well. And it's really difficult to do that if you don't have the right financial controls in place.
Yeah, Ryan, what are your thoughts? Is it very similar to that? Like, is there anything you'd add in terms of what that financial confidence can look like?
No, so I think it's exactly that. It's just sort of, I think, and probably what we'll come across in this episode, I'm sure, it's about basically just good housekeeping and having a really good oversight of the money coming in and out, and just sort of, as you would with your own finances, treat the clubs just the same, so look after them.
Revenue generation and diversifying of income streams are critical for our clubs. Is there any differences in their approach depending on what it is, or is it just having that consistent approach when it comes to having these controls and measures in place?
I think what we always advise is if a club is relying on one source of income, that obviously increases the financial risk to the club. So if they're just relying on one pot of money coming in, what happens if that pot reduces or stops for whatever reason? So when we talk about diversifying income, we're talking about clubs being able to get access to different funding streams. So that could be from selling merchandise, it could be from sponsorships, it could be holding fundraising events, it could be applying for grants.
I think when you're applying for grants as well, it's important to think about what grants are actually available to your club depending on its legal and tax structure. So not all grants are going to be available to everyone. So you always want to keep that in mind when applying for grants. But also if you're thinking about changing the structure of your club, it's just good to have that in mind as well, I think.
Yeah.
And you've given us some wonderful advice on why we should set budgets, how we should set budgets, but there's the reality as well, isn't there, of keeping track of records and that record keeping element of this as well. What advice would you give volunteers to stay on top of that?
Yes, so you do need to be keeping accurate and up-to-date records of all the assets and liabilities of the club. You also want to be writing down what money's coming in and out of the club as well. I think in addition to that, it's important and it can be helpful to write down who's authorising these spends and then what that spend was for. It just means that if in the future there's ever a question about why did that happen, you know who to go to ask why, and they can give a bit more background, and it just means there's going to be no questions asked in the future that you can't answer.
That's a great point. In the FA standardised rules, it's about how diverse are the people that are actually signing off these budgets. So it's not just one person, or it's not a husband and wife from the same family and stuff, to make sure there is that transparency and accountability in place. Some clubs obviously consider, because predominantly volunteer run, reimbursing through expenses. Is there any advice or guidance you could give on how clubs can manage expenses effectively?
So I think in terms of managing expenses, there's two different ways to look at it. I think from one angle, you've got the expenses that you've just mentioned there of the people running the club. Typically, it's fine to be reimbursed for reasonably incurred expenses. Always be careful though, especially if you've got a special tax status, so there are more rules for charities, for example. I think what's really key is having a policy in place. So if your club does choose to reimburse its committee members, you need to be really clear and you need to be really consistent on when and how they can access that sort of reimbursing the funds. The other side of it is obviously just the expense of the club as a whole, the outgoings of the club. And I think that's just going back to what me and Jessie have already talked about, keeping a really good budget and strict record keeping.
Okay, really good advice there. One thing I've made a note on here is to ask you about bank accounts and mandates as well, because I feel that's another area of financial controls that clubs really need to make sure they've got that transparency and that clear route of practice. So what would be your advice there?
I think the key thing for a bank account is making sure that the club has a dedicated bank account for itself. It shouldn't be a personal bank account of a committee member and you're just sort of tacking on all of his everyday stuff alongside the club's finances. And I think second to that is always making sure, like you mentioned before, Tom, having more than one person as signatory to the bank account. Not only does that reduce the risk of fraud and error, and also if there is one person, it puts them in a difficult position. But I think practically for the club as well, having more than one person access the bank, if that person's ever ill or just not available for whatever reason, the club's not going to get very far without access to the account. So I think just from a really practical perspective, having more than one person.
Would you recommend a limit though? Could there be too many, or is that not really a thing, too many signatories?
Well, yeah, because you want to always have control over who's got access to it. So you don't want the whole.
You don't want an
club.
11-a-side team, basically. So just make it really manageable okay, that makes sense.
Again, back in the standardised rules, you've got to have a minimum of 3, and it should be the chair, the secretary, and the treasurer. And no, you can't fill more than 2 of them roles being the same person. So we've got to take into appreciation as smaller clubs that are just starting out. There might be the chair and the treasurer, for example. But if you can diversify,
That's why those standardised rules are in place.
That's why they're there. Treasurer, obviously such an important role, but as these clubs sort of grow and get bigger and being accountable and transparent with accounts, how important is that role? Or clubs of the size that we're talking about, like 2- and 3-star clubs, having someone that has either got the skills and the abilities to manage their accounts in that role or actually get accounts audited? How important is that?
I think it is important to have a treasurer in the club. It's just someone who then is going to be overseeing things, and it means that their key responsibilities are going to be looking at what money's coming in, also the money that's going out. So if you're paying for your pitch hire, for example, someone needs to be monitoring what money's coming out of the club account. Also, if you have commercial activity, like Ryan mentioned, if you've got fundraising and things like that, merchandise sales, someone needs to be checking what money's coming in from those things, and that will likely be your treasurer. And that treasurer can also be the person who prepares the accounts for the club and then reporting back to the management committee about those things as well.
Yeah, so important a club treasurer.
I do think, sorry, just to jump in though, I do think it's worth adding that although the treasurer might take lead on the club's finances, the club has to remember the committee or the board is ultimately and collectively responsible for the financial state of the club.
Yeah, that is so important. It's everyone's responsibility, not just that individual that's taken that title of being treasurer, so to speak. Well, look, one club who knows how to run their finances well, and it hasn't always been easy from the very start, is Newton-le-Willows. Let's catch up with them now and hear about the journey they've been on in this part of football governance.
Dave, Andy, thank you both so much for joining us. Really, really great to have a little bit of time with you to explore the journey that your club's been on around its finances. And perhaps, Dave, if I could come to you first, can you tell us about where the club was at with its finances versus where it finds itself today?
Yeah, sure, yeah. We were very traditional in, like most clubs, in the sense that, most of our finances came in through subs, and that came in, basically through a lot of it through cash, but we had some direct debits and standing orders and so on. A lot of the revenue flow was from that. I would say that we weren't too robust in terms of following up with some of the teams, particularly some of the older age groups, where maybe we were a little bit lax in maybe bringing those subs in. So we didn't really have good control of that revenue in some areas. We knew that, I think, before the FA got involved with us, but really once the FA got sort of offered to come forward as a consultancy exercise, that was the catalyst, if you like, to say, right, we really need to do something about it. We did that, and we selected a system called Pitchero. I think it's quite widely used by a lot of clubs, and that allowed us for the first time then to look at electronic subs, basically. But we have now fully implemented it, and I think it's been live now for at least 2 years, I think, and all of that now is electronic. Now, the benefit of that is, as I said before, is we've now got full financial reporting controls there. We can see where all of those direct debits are coming from, at least our treasurer can at least, and we can follow that up. And so we can find out when things are going a bit astray and things like that. And we didn't used to be able to do that. The other recommendation from the FA was to go down the charitable incorporated organisation route, the CIO route. So along that journey, we went through the CIO route. We were successful in becoming a CIO. And I have to say, I was quite surprised recently at the AGM when Chris gave us the numbers. The amount of revenue we now get from grants is massively more than we used to do. And I think that's a symptom of being a CIO, because when you apply for grants, you can tick that box that says you're a charity. So I hope that's explained how we've gone from A to B. Yeah?
Yeah, it absolutely has. And amongst that A to B, of course, lots of different chapters, a lot of hard work, a lot of expertise, a lot of guidance. But Andy, I think just hearing that example there, your club is probably similar to a lot of clubs. It wasn't that you were in a desperately poor situation to begin with. It was just that you were looking for that sense of trying to be better as a football club. And what you've unearthed is so many different ways and strategies. I suppose I wanted to ask you, for clubs listening to this that want to ensure their sort of long-term financial success and sustainability, what is that best first step when tackling a subject that can sometimes feel a bit overwhelming?
For me, I would advocate anybody exploring a system similar to Pitchero, because it will allow you to have better sound financial visibility and reporting. Dave's mentioned about the CIO as well. We always produce accounts anyway, but it's different when you're reporting up to the Charities Commission. And I think one of the things that we pride ourselves on as a football club at Newton is that we have got full transparency of all our incomings and outgoings to members. So there's a couple of things you can take from that. One, go and explore your options. Two, speak to the FA as well. The FA will give you some really sound guidance that we found them to be really helpful and supportive in the decision-making process. So don't be put off by change. Embrace it. And there's a couple of things, even on our journey, that we haven't explored yet. I mean, we keep mentioning gift aid and getting scared about, oh, well, it's classed as a donation, so people might just not donate, right? Because we might not get it. So, we're not completed in our journey yet. But try and come to a sensible conclusion using the knowledge and expertise within the club.
That's really sound advice. And I think for all grassroots clubs, especially those that are England accredited, they're always wanting to get better. And you've put those building blocks in place to get better. I think both of you have kind of alluded to this in your answers. But if I was to ask you both to pick out one improvement or benefit that you feel those at Newton who are part of the football club, the players, the volunteers, the coaches, have had from you undertaking this real forensic look at your finances, what would that one key benefit be? And Dave, I'll come to you. I know you mentioned about the grants and funding, but anything else that you think's had a real impact?
The one thing I'd pick out, and the thing I'm so proud of in the club in some respects, is the improvement to facilities. And that was also in our development plan, and the development plan that we put together with the FA was we put our 5-year plan together there, and we revisit that from time to time. And one of the things we really saw loud and clear was that the demand for grassroots football in our area. We couldn't meet the demand without actually improving our facilities.
Everything that Dave has said, I would agree with. I think when we looked at the grants before we were a CIO, we were effectively excluding ourselves from 25% of money that's out there, because you have to be a charity to apply for certain grants. And what that has meant is that we've been able to develop our football through the community. So I'll talk about things like disability football. We talk about an older kind of like walking football that we've introduced this season, and a number of different pathways, loads of developments in girls football via Wildcats. We've been able to do that because as a charity, we've been able to apply for funding to keep our subs affordable, not excluding anyone financially from trying football, even though our subs run at around about 65% of our costs. So basically, if you look at if everyone pays all of their money in, the football club has got to find 35% to basically bridge the gap. And when you're talking about 100,000 plus organisation, into £100,000 plus kind of organisation, that's no mean feat. So being eligible for those grants and allowing us to kind of develop that football offering, I think has been great.
You've highlighted so many incredible benefits, and it's clear, thanks to your time as volunteers, your football club has yielded some fantastic results already. Andy, for anyone listening to this, I think they're going to find it really inspirational. But of course, sometimes these challenges, particularly around finance, which we're not all knowledgeable on, can feel a little bit daunting. Are there any sort of initial quick wins that you think perhaps a club listening to this could undertake to help them get on their way and aim to get into the healthy financial picture that you are?
We're so lucky financially that we've got Chris, who's our treasurer, who's a registered accountant. I'm probably better at marking pitches than Chris is, but there's no doubt who the better person is in terms of doing our accounts for the Charities Commission, right? So I think the first step for anybody would be to try and audit and understand your network of parents and volunteers, because otherwise you're in danger of putting a square peg in a round hole, right? So, and then my job with Chris is to support him. I mean, only a couple of days ago, I sent him a link to a patch of software which would help him in terms of invoice management and being able to send them all on checks for payments without him doing it manually. So at the moment, he's getting a Word document and making it look pretty and sending it out, and it's a lot of work for him. So there is definitely the tools out there to help your treasurer, and the organisations that are 3-star accredited, that I guess are or aspiring to be 3-star accredited, are going to be of a significant size of football club, and you cannot put a price on volunteers. So yes, whilst we pay for Pitchero as our preferred system, and we're looking at paying for potentially this software that I've sent over to him as a recommendation, actually the benefits that you gain back in terms of being able to manage your cash flow better, in particular busy periods over the winter months when we've got winter training costs, etc. That's worth its weight in gold. The benefits far outweigh the costs. So, and I said earlier, speak to like-minded clubs, speak to FA representative. They're there to help.
Amazing stuff. Look, thank you both so much. We appreciate all those bits of advice and tips and sharing your secrets as well with us there too. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries, Charlotte.
Great to hear from the guys there at Newton-le-Willows. We're now joined by FA Club Consultant Mark Hilton, who's been helping support the club on that journey. It must make you really proud with the work and the support that you've given the club.
Yeah, I think I remember back when we had the original meet with clubs in 2019, and the guys at Newton-le-Willows were ringing me from the car on the way home, buzzing with ideas, but also with a bit of trepidation as well. So I've been on that journey with them, and it's, they're a good club with good people.
You can see even then just like how much energy they still have to constantly want to be better, take on board advice and so on. Brilliant to have you here. And before we ask you too many questions, it would be great to learn a little bit more about how you see your role as an FA Club consultant, and I suppose the conduit you are sometimes between clubs, Muckle, and providing clubs with that finance support and advice, which is so important.
Yeah, I think the governance and finance pillar of the club reviews is probably the biggest one, I would say. It's one where the planning for a club always starts, and a club, you can come across any club with any situation. They're all different. There's no one plan fits all, and taking them on that journey with professional services help from people like Muckle is really, really important in that club's long-term plans. So it's exciting.
Like you say, you had the first conversation back in 2019. We're now in 2025. What does your role look like, just so we can have an appreciation of the recognition that needs to go to the volunteers and the people at the club? Because it's them that essentially needs to put the time, the effort, the energy, and keep the enthusiasm going when going through things such as governance and legal.
I think I'm always conscious that we're giving clubs who are mainly volunteers a lot of work to do, and we don't want to pile more work on them. But with clubs like Newton-le-Willows, it was a case of spend time to save time. And they had projects that they knew were coming along in a number of years' time, that they put the work in now, so when those projects are about to happen, they're good to go with their governance and financial structures. So sometimes you have to spend a little time to save it all later.
Yeah. And perhaps there's a reason why we left financial controls to the last in this series, because it is a juicy subject, but quite similarly, when you're mentioning there, volunteers give up a lot of time and all of the things that are on a to-do list, just the general tone of a season is so quick, it's hard to catch your breath. And sometimes, like it or not, things like finances, just take your eye off it for a little while. It becomes a little bit longer, months and months can potentially go by. So in terms of, I guess, a bit of a basic starting point when it comes to financial controls for those England football accredited clubs, where would you sort of recommend to start?
Know your legal structure, so know your legal requirements for that.
Watch episode 2 then.
Yeah. So know what your reporting requirements are as a bare minimum. I think the rest then comes down to putting the right people in the right place. You know, nobody wants really a treasurer that ends up with a job because nobody else wanted to do it. You want somebody who's committed to that role. You want a board that, with those key people, will plan out a budget, will give that budget oversight, will put financial controls on spending and who operates the bank account all in place. And I think one of the key things is then reviewing that budget, seeing where you are, because a football club's costs are not static. You know, some of the membership fees might be, but all the other costs, utility costs, line marking, paint, or whatever it might be, they're variable. So you need that budget so you can compare where you think you were going to be, where you were last year, and it does need that eyes on it all the time.
And the clubs that we're talking about, obviously significant size, they might have a bar or cafe where they obviously take income in and try and regenerate that back into the club. If there was a top tip you used to give clubs on like the handling or receiving of cash in terms of spend or donations, what might that look like? Because we see a lot of businesses transitioning into a contactless and sort of paperless world, if you like, but clubs are still handling cash on a day-to-day.
Yeah, use technology as much as you can, whether that's member fee collection apps, zero accounting apps, liaise with your accountancy firm so you've got a seamless transition of how you collect all this money and how it's all shown so that the accounts can be produced. Cash is always going to be there to some extent, but the more we can digitise stuff and put those apps in place, and those accounting apps in particular, again, it's a case of spend a bit of time setting all these up to save a little time later.
And Mark, we've investigated sort of the aspects of financial controls with the team at Muckle. We've heard, of course, from the volunteers at Newton-le-Willows as well. But I think sometimes it's important to share where mistakes have occurred or lessons learned, things that perhaps we could have told our volunteer self 10, 20 years ago. If there was one thing that you could perhaps say to a volunteer now to help them in this aspect of their financial management, what tip would you give?
I think have a robust budget and a strategic plan so you can, and give it oversight, look at it regularly, see where you are, because things change. We have clubs that don't need to be back registered, but then they start growing and building, and all of a sudden the trading income goes above the VAT ceiling of 90,000. You need to know that.
I was going to say, even knowing that is quite important.
Yeah, so you need to know these things that are going to come along at some point, and that's why I think it's really key to have the right people in the right place.
And we've got these bite-sized guides coming from Muckle, so we'll put the link to where you can find them in the description and stuff, and they'll give them top tips and them little bits of insight that you do need to know to help them on that journey.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time, and well done as well for all the work that you've done, not just with Newton-le-Willows, but all the clubs as well.
They do all the work.
You help them on their way. You help them on their way. Final substitution for this episode. Let's welcome back the team from Muckle. Many thanks to Mark and the guys at Newton-le-Willows. We hope that you found it useful hearing about their experiences and what they've gone through when it comes to managing their financial controls. We've still got the team from Muckle here with us, and we've been saying throughout this series it's really good to share best practice, best advice, the top standards as well, but let's be realistic. Sometimes clubs do get into challenging situations. My sort of question really would be to get your advice, really. Touch wood, it doesn't happen, but what should clubs do if financial problems arise?
If the worst case happens and financial problems do arise, I think the key bit of advice would be the club needs to act fast. So I think it might sound obvious, but some of the key advice to give is, where can the club reduce its outgoings? How can it stop spending money? And on the flip side of that, are there any opportunities sort of immediately or quickly that they can get their income increased? So just bought two sides of a coin there, either stop spending or bring in more money. It sounds pretty basic, but I appreciate it's more difficult than it could be. I think if that doesn't work, the club needs to realise that there's people out there who can help. So if there's anyone from a regulatory point of view that they need to get in touch with, so that might be the County FA, or it could be the Charity Commission, if that's applicable, those bodies will need to know if the club's struggling, but not just to sort of regulate and step in, but also to offer them support if they can. And I think it's also really important that clubs remember they can seek professional advice if they need to. So that could be the lawyers, or it could be their accountants. They don't just need to sit in fear on their own.
Yeah, that is a really important thing, because lots of people give up their time to do these volunteering roles. You don't want anyone to feel like isolated or lonely, but also sweeping perhaps a problem under the carpet. Always best to be proactive and get that support. I think it's important.
Absolutely. And there's been a lot in this episode around the financial controls. If there was one top tip or one thing to help try and summarise, or the next thing a club watching or listening to this back could go and do and act on first, what would that be?
Well, I think let's hope first of all that by watching this video, it's going to help mitigate any financial problems that the club might have. So touch wood, hopefully that should help. And I think it's just linking back to those main points that we mentioned. Think about the budget, think about the short term, the long term, the medium term. Think about planning for your club as well. Don't know if you have anything to add, Ryan.
No, I think there's that obviously, and then some of the documents that we've mentioned, just the basics. Your governing document, is it fit for purpose? Is there something in there that you could change to help you boost your funding? Is your legal structure as good as it could be? Is your tax status correct? Obviously, there's lots of different things to think about there, but I think they all sort of encapsulate the idea that if your club's in the best place it can be, hopefully it should just naturally generate more income and sort of set you up to have a sustainable future.
Well, that is a perfect note to end on, because the whole reason why we drew this series together, working with our friends at Muckle, is to help you and your football club have that bright, sustainable future. And we hope that you have found this whole series really useful. If you haven't caught up on the episodes yet, you can do so on the Club Hub. Hop between the two, pause, make notes, do what you need to. If you've got any follow-up questions as well, you can use the comments section below, and we would love to help you and get back to you with some really good advice.
Yeah. Hopefully it's give you a bit of a spark of what to do in the world of governance and to improve your club governance. But if this is just a starting point, please go check out the bite-sized guides on the Muckle website. That will give you more detail and more information, and reach out to those with professional expertise, such as the County FA, your club consultants. And then if needs be, Muckle are always here as our trusted partners to help you.
And that's just about all we have time for on this series of Extra Time. But of course, we're going to be back delving into more subjects. In the Box will be back as well. So if you haven't yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button to the Club Hub so you're the first to know when our episodes drop. We can't wait to see you soon. Until then, goodbye.